Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidina Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. So in today's class, last lecture we ended the sort of historical analysis of the madhab. So for today's class we are going to turn to something else. Inshallah, what I plan to do in today's class is to go back to talk about what the Khurasani and the Iraqi branches of the madhab mean, what are the differences between them, and narrate for you the 8 or 9 generations of the main ulama of each branch. So it's a little bit name heavy, this lecture, but it's something that it's important that you hear in understanding the madhab. And then we will talk about the people that made the effort to join, the people that brought both of those strands together. The next part, that's like the first half of the lecture. The next half of the lecture, which is equally important, is I'm going to narrate for you the tasalsul of the books. How starting with the writings of Imam Shafi'i in Furu'a, how the books then are summarized over the years until we get to the final books that we study in the madhab, like the books of Imam Nawawi and the commentaries on the Minhaj of Imam Nawawi. Of course, there are books written after Imam Nawawi, but it's important that I show you, generation by generation, step by step, how the books and the writings of Imam Shafi'i got to basically Imam Nawawi's writings, and therefore why we study those books. A lot of this information you've heard throughout the lectures, but today's lecture is going to be solely done straightforward. So this will be like a reference lecture for you to be able to go back to and understand, Rafi, where is Rafi's books? How did they get to where we are? What's the relationship between, this book of Al-Buwaiti or Imam Al-Haramain and Imam Al-Nawawi? Those are the things that we're going to do. Inshallah, I'm going to narrate for you 10 chains of 10 types of books. And then, 4 chains of books. I don't know why I said 10. 4 chains going back from the beginning to the end. And then we'll make like a notable mention of the Matn of Abi Shuja', which is sort of outside of this schema, and we've talked about that before. These are the main subjects, inshallah, we'll talk about in this lecture. All right, so let us begin. Now, we've talked about frequently these 2 strands of fiqh that emerged from the time of Imam Shafi'i, which is the Iraqi strand and the Khurasani strand. So what is the difference between the 2? Imam al-Nawawi says, rahimahullah, who is the authority on this matter, he says that the Iraqi scholars tended to be better than the Khurasani scholars at narrating the madhab, narrating the positions of the madhab, narrating the principles of the madhab. And the Khurasanis tended to be better than the Iraqis in issues of research. So let me just briefly explain what that means. One part of the journey of a school of Islamic law is to narrate, is to pass on the information, like what Al-Rabi'a did, which is essential, because without that, the madhab doesn't get passed on. I heard my teacher say on this issue of zakah such and such, and I can explain why, So passing on doesn't mean I just copy and paste it. You have to also understand the rhyme and reason behind it. You have to understand why, the adilla, the illa, etc. And then you pass it on. But then there's another half to that, which is, well, I'm thinking based on that issue of zakah, how about this other issue that might look like it? That's al-bahth, that's the research part. At-tawassa is to expand. You need both of those. And that's why both of these become one strand. So the Iraqis tended to be better than their Khurasani colleagues in passing on the madhab, documenting it, which is critical. And then the Khurasanis tended to be, the Khurasanis tended to be better than the Iraqis in the bahth that they had of the madhab. So that's the main difference. Now, the first person to bring these 2 together that's documented was Abi Ali al-Husayn ibn Shu'aib ibn Muhammad al-Sanji, who died in the year 430. So, quite early, 430. However, when Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah himself gives his own chain of transmission to the Shafi'i madhab, he mentions that as late as Ibn Salah, and Ibn Salah he died in the year 643, as late as Ibn Salah, the two madhabs were taught together. So that also reminds us of something else that's important, which is that these things are not like, it's not instantaneous, which is why I've been saying all along, when I say like stage 3 or stage 5 or this historical stage, these are like artificial constructs, because it doesn't really always work like that. We tag the history of the madhab usually with the famous personality, the death of the famous personalities. But look, if Senji died in 430 and he was the first to bring the two approaches together, the naql and the bahth, and then the two madhabs were still taught as separate, or two approaches were still taught as separate up until the passing of Ibn Salah in 643, that's over 200 years. Over 200 years, that's a lot. So these things take time to come together. Now, there's no difference. We don't think, this is the Iraqi approach or this is the Khurasani. We just said this is the Shafi'i approach. And that's why this lecture is important. So we talk about the tasalsul of the books and how the books are written and summarized and commented on, because a lot of the books that we're going to talk about are before these two approaches have been brought together. And then their commentaries and meta-commentaries come after the approaches have been brought together. And that's why we always study the latter books. So as I say, when we study fiqh, we study backwards to forwards. Okay? So, the two approaches, the Khurasani and the Iraqi. Now, let me go back and let's look at them one by one. The Khurasani branch. Okay? The first branch, the first generation, the Khurasani branch, we're going to talk about 9 generations. So bear with me, this will be name heavy. The first are the generation of those who studied with Sayyidina Imam Shafi'i radiallahu anhu, like Ishaq ibn Rahawayh al-Hamdali, Hamid ibn Yahya ibn Hani al-Balkhi, who also took from Imam Shafi'i. He also took from Sufyan ibn Uyayna, Sa'id al-Asfahani, al-Hasan ibn Muhammad ibn Yazid, and he was the first one to take the knowledge and the fiqh of Imam Shafi'i to Isfahan. And Abu al-Husayn al-Nisaburi, Ali ibn Salama ibn Shaqiq, and he died in the year 252. Okay, so that's the tabaqa, that's the generation of Imam Shafi'i's students that are the seeds of the Khurasani branch. Now the second generation. We have Abu Bakr ibn Ishaq ibn Khuzaymah, who wrote the Sahih, Abu Abdullah ibn Muhammad ibn Nasr al-Maruzi. He studied the Shafi'i madhab in Egypt with Imam Shafi'i's students, and then later moved to Samarkand, and he died in 294. We have Abu Muhammad al-Maruzi, Abdan ibn Muhammad ibn Isa. He studied with al-Muzani directly. And we have Abu Asim Fudail ibn Muhammad al-Fudaili al-Kabir, who was the faqih of Hurat. We also have Abu al-Hasan al-Sabuni. We also have Abu Sa'id al-Darimi. We also have Amr al-Khaffaf, who was the chief scholar of Nisabur, and Abu Abdullah Muhammad ibn Ibrahim al-Abdi al-Bushinji. Okay, third generation. Abu Ali al-Thaqafi and Abu Bakr, Ahmed ibn Ishaq ibn Ayyub al-Sabghi, and Abu Bakr al-Mahmudi al-Maruzi, and Abu al-Fadl Yaqub ibn Ishaq ibn Muhammad al-Harawi. So you can tell by the names al-Harawi, this person was in Nisabur, this is the Khurasani branch, right? This is the branch that's in Khurasan. Then we have the fourth generation, Abu Ishaq al-Maruzi, who was the student of Ibn Surayj. And he was one of the, this is the third generation. Imam al-Nawawi indicates that he's one of the people that brings starts to think about bringing the two together. We have Abu al-Walid Hassan ibn Muhammad al-Qurashi al-Nisaburi. We also have Abu al-Hasan al-Nasawi. We have Abu Bakr al-Bayhaqi. We have Abu Mansur Abdullah ibn Mahran. And yeah, so this is the third generation. Now we go to the fourth generation. Again, the fourth generation of the Khurasani branch. Abu Zayd al-Maruzi, Abu Sahl al-Sa'luki, and Abu al-Abbas al-Harawi, and Abu Hafs al-Harawi, and there are other ones. But these are just giving you the main names. And then we have the sixth generation, Abu Bakr al-Qaffal al-Maruzi. He is the leader of this generation. Abu Tayyib al-Sa'luki and Abu Yaqub al-Abyurd al-Abyuwardi and Abu Ishaq al-Isfarini. In the seventh generation, we have Al-Qadi al-Hussein and Abu Ali al-Sanji and Abu Bakr al-Saydalani. And then in the eighth generation, we have Imam al-Haramain, who wrote Nihayat al-Matlab fi Dirayat al-Madhab. This is a very important book. It will be the chief book of the Silsila books when I get to it shortly. And then the ninth generation of the Khurasani branch, we have Ilkiya al-Harasi, Abu Sa'd al-Mutawalli, Muhi Sunnah al-Baghawi, Imam al-Baghawi, al-Rawayani, and also Imam al-Haramain. And we include in this generation Hujjatul Islam Imam al-Ghazali radiyallahu anhum ajma'in. Okay, so this is 9 generations of the Khurasani branch, and as Imam al-Nawawi said, the Khurasani branch, they tend to be better in branching out and researching legal issues. Okay, so some of these names you haven't heard of before, and that's all right. Some of them we've heard before. They're like giants in the history of Islam itself. Some of them we've mentioned over the course of these lectures. But it's important that we understand that they are considered these 9 generations, and it you can easily think about it. It ends with around the death of Imam Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah in the year 505, and even as early as the 3rd generation, there's some evidence that some of the ulama are bringing the 2 branches together. In the next clip, we'll pick up where we left off to talk about the Iraqi branch, inshallah. Okay. The Iraqi branch, we're going to talk about the 8 generations. So, starting with the generation of those who studied with Imam Shafii himself, radiallahu anhu. Abu Thawr Ibrahim ibn Khalid al-Kalbi al-Baghdadi. We've mentioned him before. He studied with Imam Shafii. Ahmad ibn Hanbal would be considered part of this branch as well, or this generation, even though he goes on to form his own madhab. Abu Ja'far, by the way, there is a difference of opinion. Some fuqaha, and I've heard this opinion before, do not consider the Hanbali madhab to be an independent madhab, but to be sort of a branch of the Shafi'i madhab. I mean, that requires much more thinking and scholarship, but there's an opinion out there that says that. Then we also have, after Ahmad ibn Hanbal radiallahu anhu, we have Abu Ja'far al-Khilal Ahmad ibn Khalid al-Baghdadi. We have Abu Ja'far al-Nahshili thumma al-Baghdadi. We have Abu Abdullah al-Sayrafi. We have Abdul Rahman Ahmad ibn Yahya ibn Abdul Aziz al-Baghdadi. We have Al-Harith ibn Surayj al-Naqal. He's called al-Naqal because he is the one that he does naql, or he transmits the risal of Imam Shafi'i. He transmitted it to Abdul Rahman al-Mahdi. Abdul Rahman al-Mahdi, who died in 236, rahimahullah, he's the one that wrote to Imam Shafi'i asking him to write him the risala, discussing these legal issues, and that's how it came. We also have Al-Hasan ibn Abdul Aziz al-Masri, who ended up living in Baghdad, and Al-Karabisi Al-Hussein ibn Ali al-Baghdadi, who died in the year 248. Okay, so these were some of the contemporaries of Imam Shafi'i radiallahu anhu in Iraq, and those who took from him. Now, the second generation of them is Abu al-Qasim al-Anmati and Abu Bakr al-Nisaburi. and Abu Ja'far Muhammad ibn Ahmed ibn Nasr al-Tirmidhi, also Al-Qadi Abu Ubaidullah, عفوا, Abu Ubaid Ali ibn al-Hussein ibn Hirbawayh al-Baghdadi, Abu Ishaq al-Harbi, and Abu Hassan al-Mundhiri. The third generation, Ibn Surayj, who was the chief of this generation, Salik, Sabil al-Insaf, عفوا, Ibn Surayj, who is the sheikh of this generation, Abu al-Abbas Ahmed ibn Umar ibn Surayj, who's the Qadi of Baghdad, Abu Sa'id al-Istakhri, it's a Sad and a Ta, al-Istakhri, and Abu Ali ibn Khayran, also Abu Hafs al-Ma'ruf ibn Wakil, and Umar ibn Abdullah al-Baghdadi. So Ibn Surayj, I started reading from the book, so my reading got mixed up. Ibn Surayj is Abu al-Abbas Ahmed ibn Umar ibn Surayj. All of those, the sentences before were sort of honoring him, so I read that as if they're two people. It's just one person, Abu al-Abbas Ahmed ibn Umar ibn Surayj. He was the chief of this generation, he was the Qadi of Baghdad. Okay, the third generation, the fourth generation, Abu Ishaq al-Maruzi, Abu Ali ibn Abi Harira, Abu Tayyib Muhammad ibn Fadl ibn Muslima al-Baghdadi, Abu Bakr al-Sayrafi al-Baghdadi, Abu Abbas ibn al-Qadi, Abu Ja'far al-Istarabadi, Abu Bakr Ahmed ibn al-Hussein ibn Sahl al-Farisi. He wrote a famous book called Uyun al-Masail fi Nusus al-Shafi'i. He died in 350. We have also Abu al-Hussein Ahmed ibn Muhammad ibn Ahmed ibn al-Qattan, who died in 359. So there are some Khurasani names, right? But most of these people are Baghdadi. So you can see that these are the Iraqi branch. The fifth generation, Abu al-Qasim Abdul Aziz ibn Abdullah al-Baghdadi, who was the Sheikh of Iraq at this time. Also Abu Ali al-Tabari and Abu al-Hasan ibn al-Marzaban. As for the sixth generation, we have Abu Hamid al-Isfariyini, Ahmed ibn Muhammad ibn Ahmed al-Baghdadi. That's one person. Abu Hamid al-Isfariyini, Ahmed ibn Muhammad ibn Ahmed al-Baghdadi, who died in 406. Abu al-Hasan al-Masarjisi and Abu al-Fadl al-Nasawi. Then we have the seventh generation, Abu al-Hasan al-Mawardi, who wrote the famous Kitab al-Hawi, wal-Qadi Abu Tayyib, Salim ibn Ayyub al-Razi, Abu al-Hasan al-Muhamili al-Shashi. Abu al-Hasan al-Muhamili is one person, al-Shashi is another person, al-Bandaniji, and al-Qadi Abu Sa'id al-Abayurdi. And then we have the eighth generation, which is the last generation of the Iraqi branch. So the Khurasani branch has 9 generations, this has 8 generations. Qadi Abu Sa'ib, Uqba ibn Abdullah ibn Musa al-Hamadani, then Abu al-Hasan al-Muhamili al-Kabir, and then Abu Sahl Ahmed ibn Zayyad, Abu Bakr Muhammad ibn Umar az-Zabadi al-Baghdadi, and Abu Muhammad al-Juzjani, and Abu Tayyib al-Sa'id al-Khilal. Okay, so these 9 and 8 generations of the people that I just mentioned, again, some names we've heard of, some names we haven't heard of before, we haven't discussed, and that's all right, is the two approaches. Again, one excelling, the Iraqis excelling in transmitting the madhab faithfully, and the Khurasanis excelling in research. It doesn't mean that the Iraqis didn't do research and then the Khurasanis didn't transmit. It just means that when Imam al-Nawawi analyzed the two branches, he noticed that this is what makes one distinguished amongst the other. Both are needed for our madhab to survive. And it's not like these were isolated things and no one knew about the other. They were the barriers were porous, and for at least 200 years there was a reconciliation or a bringing of the works together. Now, of course, the next clip we're going to talk about the books, and that will you'll understand how over time the understanding the genealogy of the books, how the books get to us, and what other books in the past they take from is very, very important, because you will see that the books that we study now bring in all of this. It brings in all of the interactions of Imam al-Shafi'i with Malik and with al-Awza'i's madhab and al-Layth's madhab and the Shaybani and the Abu Hanifa, and so on and so forth. So when we study like a little book of fiqh now, don't think it's just like this little book of fiqh that doesn't have anything. This is based on a mountain of data and information and knowledge of Islamic law. But you can't study, I can't, as a beginning student, I can't say, okay, we have to read these 13 volumes together. Even the Kitab al-Umm, it's a dense book. It's like at least 9 volumes, I think. I can't remember how many volumes mine is, but it's dense. It's thick reading. It's not easy. You'll never get through it. So you need to understand, this is an important part of understanding the Shafi'i madhab. You need to understand that there were these 2 branches that emerged largely as a function of Imam al-Shafi'i traveling around, and then him not just traveling around, but refining his madhab as he was traveling. So by the time he gets to Egypt, he's like, in his mind, he's like, okay, now the issue for me is clear. And therefore, when some of his Iraqi students asked to transmit, he said, no, don't transmit things that I gave you. Take now from the books that I'm writing now in Egypt. This is where the madhab is. So by default, it would be assumed, therefore, that there are these 2 branches that come. Now, as I mentioned in the very beginning, the first Sinji, who died in the year 430, is the first documented, according to Imam al-Nawawi, that brings these 2 branches together. But as late as Ibn Salah, who died in the year 643, the 2 madhabs were taught. And it's really the efforts of the later generations, starting with people like Imam al-Haramain al-Juwayni, who dies in the year 478, that the real writing and the bringing together of these 2 approaches is joined. And that's why those are the books that we end up studying, and those are the books that we end up relying on. Inshallah, that will be the bulk of the next lecture, which I will talk to you about the tasalsul of these books, inshallah. So I'll pick it up in the next clip. Okay, let's look at the books. When we talk about the writings of Imam al-Shafi'i, rahimahullah, in regards to fiqh or furu'a, we consider 4 books. We consider Kitab al-Umm, his other book al-Imla', the writings of al-Buwiti, and the Mukhtasar of al-Muzani. Now, of course, as I said in the very beginning of the lectures, we consider the writings of al-Buwiti, the opinions of al-Buwiti, and the Mukhtasar of al-Muzani to be the writings of Imam al-Shafi'i, because they were his direct students, and those were written based on his madhab. So, for all intents and purposes, we say that those 4 are the main, writings. Or you can say that the main writing of the madhab, another approach or another opinion, is that the main writing of the madhab is the Mukhtasar of al-Muzani. So there are 2 camps, there are 2 schools of thought. The important thing is that Imam al-Haramain al-Juwayni, he wrote Nihayat al-Matlab, which was a summary of, you either can consider those 4 books or a summary of the Mukhtasar of al-Muzani. What's important to remember is that Imam al-Juwayni's Nihayat al-Matlab is the first textbook of the madhab. And it brings together those things that were in the early generation. For the first, couple of generations, or the first couple of centuries, there was, we said that Imam al-Haramain died in 478, so a little over 200 years after the passing of Imam al-Shafi'i. There were books that were written, but they were mainly just the narrating of the original books. Imam al-Haramain, he writes like this is the textbook, okay? So we start with the Nihayatul Matlab. Now, Imam al-Ghazali, who's a student of Imam al-Juwayni, he does something very interesting. He takes the Nihayatul Matlab, which is a big book, and he summarizes it in a book he called Al-Basit. And then Imam al-Ghazali himself said, "Oh, that's too long. I'm going to make another summary from the Basit," and he called it Al-Wasit. So wait a second, I can do better. So he takes Al-Wasit and he summarizes it into Al-Wajiz. And then he said, I can go further, and he summarizes Al-Wajiz into Al-Khalasa. So Imam al-Ghazali has these 4 books in Furu'a. Some of them are published, some of them I think we lost along the way. Al-Basit, Al-Wasit, Al-Wajiz, Al-Khulasa. And each word is, a smaller word than the word before. Al-Wajiz is the main book. So after the books of Imam al-Shafi'i, we have Nihayatul Matlab of Imam al-Haramain, and then we have Al-Wajiz of Imam al-Ghazali, which is published. You can get that. The Wajiz of Imam al-Ghazali. Here, by the way, we're talking about Furu', not Usul. I know that Imam al-Ghazali wrote the Mustasfa. He wrote books in Mantiq, etc. But we're not focused on that. We're focused right now on the Furu' books. The Wajiz of Imam al-Ghazali is what Imam al-Rafi'i works on, summarizes, and deals with in the Muharrar. The Muharrar of Imam al-Rafi'i is what Imam al-Nawawi takes from and summarizes to create the Minhaj. So let's just park there for a second. So Imam al-Nawawi's Minhaj, which is taken from al-Rafi'i's Muharrar, which is taken from al-Ghazali's Wajiz, which is taken from Imam al-Haramain's Nihayatul Matlab, which is a summary of the 4 books of Imam al-Shafi'i. Okay, so now you know why the Minhaj is the book, because it's summarizing all that comes from before it. However, the Minhaj is a long book, or not a long book, but it's a book. It's like 600-700 page book kind of book. So the Minhaj, if we were to teach it in a class, it would probably be like a 5-7 year class. It's thick. So Imam Shaykh al-Islam Zakaria al-Ansari, rahimahullah, he takes the Minhaj of Imam al-Nawawi and he creates a summary of that called al-Manhaj. And he has his own commentary on the Manhaj. The Manhaj is a teachable book, and it's very common in the past, in the pre-modern world, that Shafi'i students, that's the goal. The goal is to study the Manhaj of Zakaria al-Ansari. Because if you understand that, khalas, you can understand all of the bigger books. And then there's a lesser known Shafi'i scholar called Al-Jawhari. I don't think he's related to me, but I hope he is, inshallah. Al-Jawhari, who summarized the Manhaj to An-Nahj. So here we have all the way from the books of Imam al-Shafi'i, and let's go all the way to Shaykh al-Islam Zakaria al-Ansari or Imam al-Jawhari rahimahullah, and we can see how the books are summarized. You have to understand that this takes time. You can't just take a book, you can't write like a 10-volume book and then expect in your lifetime that book is going to be summarized into 1 volume. It takes time. It takes time to synthesize, to be able to reconcile terminology and things like that. Okay, so that's the first tasalsul, the first genealogy of books I wanted to share with you. Now let's go to another set. I want to talk about Imam al-Rafi'i's books. Imam al-Rafi'i took the Wajiz of Imam al-Ghazali and he wrote a commentary on it, 2 commentaries. He has a small commentary, Sharh al-Saghir, which he didn't name it, and then he has a Sharh al-Kabir. So when we say Imam al-Rafi'i's Sharh al-Kabir, it is a treatment and commentary on Imam al-Ghazali's Wajiz. Imam al-Nawawi, his Minhaj is based on al-Rafi'i's Muharrar, which is based on the Wajiz. But Imam al-Rafi'i also has a commentary on the Wajiz called Sharh al-Kabir. Imam al-Nawawi took Sharh al-Kabir and he wrote al-Rawda. Al-Rawda is the Minhaj of Imam al-Nawawi, is the standard book, and the Rawda, it's like one hair's length ahead of the Minhaj. But the Rawda is like an encyclopedic type of book, so it's not taught, it's a reference book. The Minhaj is a teachable book. The Rawda is a reference book. So Imam al-Nawawi's Rawda, and you will find in the Hawashi, كما قال النووي في الروضة. As Imam al-Nawawi said in the Rawda. Now you know why that statement inside a Shafi'i classroom is definitive. That's it. That means that's the answer is what Imam al-Nawawi said in the Rawda. So again, Imam al-Rafi'i wrote a commentary on Ghazali's Wajiz called Sharh al-Kabir. Imam al-Nawawi took Sharh al-Kabir and he wrote a Rawda based on that. And then a Rawda was summarized into a Rawd. Who wrote that? I lost that name. Ibn al-Muqri summarized a Rawda into a Rawd, and Shaykh al-Islam Zakaria al-Ansari wrote a sharh on that called al-Asna, and Ibn Hajar also has a summary of a Rawd itself. He called it An-Na'im, but this book has been lost through time. We also have a treatment of that by Imam al-Suyuti. The Rawda of al-Nawawi was also summarized by Imam al-Suyuti called Al-Ghaniyya. Okay. So, in this second class of books, we are getting to know why the Rawda is important. Because the Rawda is a treatment. You don't have to necessarily memorize or remember all of the summaries of the Rawda, but I want you to understand that why Imam al-Nawawi's both books, the Minhaj and the Rawda, are important. So the Rawda is a commentary or treatment, rather, of Imam al-Rafi'i's Sharh al-Kabir, which is a commentary on Imam al-Ghazali's Wajiz. And then the third thing is kind of simple, which is Al-Qazwini wrote a summary of Al-Aziz Sharh al-Wajiz. He wrote that into Al-Hawi al-Saghir. So that's an important book for the madhab. And then the fourth one is kind of another track, which is Al-Mahamili, who died in the year 415. So he was a contemporary of Abi Shuja' radiallahu anhu. He wrote a book of fiqh called Al-Lubab. Al-Wali al-Araqi wrote a commentary on that called Tahrir al-Lubab. And then Zakaria al-Ansari rahimahullah wrote Tanqih Tahrir al-Lubab. And then Zakaria al-Ansari himself wrote a commentary on that called Tuhfat al-Tullab. So Tuhfat al-Tullab by Zakaria al-Ansari is a teachable book as well. I actually studied that. That's a book that you can study. And Ash-Sharqawi, Abdullah Sharqawi rahimahullah, who was the Shaykh al-Azhar when Napoleon came, he wrote a hashiyah on that. So these are four kind of tasalsul of books that are important. And of notable mention, of course, is the Matn of Abi Shuja'. He died in the year 500. Even though it's an early book, it has received many post-Nawawi commentaries and hawashi, which makes it authoritative, and it makes it the default book that we teach as we go from the beginning, intermediate to the final level until we study the works of Imam Nawawi. Wallahu ta'ala a'la wa a'lam wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Alhamdulillah, in our penultimate lecture, which is, a very important lecture, even though it's name heavy. It sounds like I'm just reading names, but it's very important because we talked about the two strands, the Khurasani strands and the Iraqi strands. And it's important for us to understand what that means, what's the differences between them. So we learned that the Iraqi Shafi'is were very excelled at narrating the madhab, and we learned that the Khurasani Shafi'is excelled at research and expanding the legal issues. I narrated for you many of the main names of the 9 generations of the Khurasanis and the 8 generations of the Iraqis. We learned that the first to reconcile or to begin reconciling those two approaches was Asenji, who died in the year 430. But as late as Ibn Salah, who died in 643, Imam al-Nawawi said that the two madhabs, or the two approaches, were taught together. By the time we get to Imam al-Nawawi, khalas, the two are one. And the second half, therefore, is we talked about why the works of Imam al-Nawawi are so important. So what we did is I gave you 4 genealogies of books of basically how we get from Imam al-Shafi'i's books to Imam al-Nawawi's Minhaj, how we get from Imam al-Shafi'i's books to the Rawda, and all of the work. Now you know why al-Rafi' and al-Nawawi are so important, because they're the ones that synthesized and commented on al-Ghazali's works, and al-Ghazali's works is a treatment of al-Juwayni's works, Imam al-Haramain, which is a summary of the works of Imam al-Shafi'i radiallahu anhu. By the way, this also is something that bears mentioning. Do you see how significant Imam al-Ghazali is for the Shafi'i madhab? So not only was Imam al-Ghazali significant as a historical figure or as a thinker or philosopher or theologian or mutasawwif in general, but look at the immense role he has into forming the Shafi'i madhab. So when we did the tasalsul, we looked at basically Imam al-Nawawi's works. As I said, there have been summaries from those works, and of notable mention, of course, was the Matn of Abi Shuja, which is a very early work that was written but receives many post-Nawawi, let's say, commentaries and hawashi, which makes it the book that we start with as we begin our journey as studying, going from backwards in the beginning of the student's journey, as we go backwards till we get to the works of Imam al-Nawawi. والحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.